Welcome to the Research Security Podcast. Today, I have a very interesting guest to talk to me about risk management, particularly third-party risk management. Hey, Vikram, how are you doing?
Doing good, Danny. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for your podcast.
Likewise, thank you for making time to speak to your audience. And I will include your LinkedIn profile so the audience can follow your writing and all your insights. So
Sure.
I'll start to introducing you. I just paraphrasing from your LinkedIn profile. Now you have a very distinguished career in risk management, and at some point you build up a specialization in third-party risk management. We often use an acronym TPRM, and TPRM is also an area of focus in my own research. Now, however, let's not assume the audience are familiar with TPRM. They probably have a good exposure to risk management, cyber risk management. Could you please help to explain a little bit to the audience your professional career, how do you get into risk and why TPRM is an area of interest, and so the audience get to know you a little bit better.
All right, Danny. You probably need me to do summarize my experience overall. Yeah, actually started my career in cybersecurity. I started with an auditor, was going around and doing audits to across a lot of organization, and then I settled into a role of in an industry association. I mean, I was an active member of Data Security Council of India. I worked there for last 4 5 years, wherein
Mm.
was instrumental in writing the DSCI security framework, the
All
privacy
right.
frameworks, and all
Mm-hmm.
of that. And then I think post that, I switched my career into the consulting role and joined the Big Four organization, wherein I had multiple roles. As I was someone who was designing security governance model for organizations, someone who was helping people achieve their security architectural reviews, helping them define their cybersecurity strategy. So played multiple roles around it. And then when I migrated to Australia, I was obviously trying to find my feet here and trying to understand where I can probably get more involved. And I saw that third-party risk management was one of the weakest areas in the region.
Mm.
And it's not because that people are not focusing, but people were more prioritized in safeguarding their own enterprise, but not realizing that a lot of what is happening in their own enterprise is dependent on how suppliers or vendors or third parties, whatever you want to call them,
Mm.
are helping them achieve. And because you're outsourcing so many activities to your vendors, and some of those activities are material activities in terms of doing actual payment gateway operations, for example, right?
Mm.
There is a need that for you to evaluate the risk associated with outsourcing that activity. And that's where third-party risk management come in. Uh, Primarily, I think that given my background in cyber all throughout my career, the focus was around doing third-party risk management around the cyber perspective. But
Mm.
I also say this, right, to a lot of people and the young audience that have met me. If you want to make your career in a particular uh, subject in the cyber, third-party risk management is a really good flavor because it cuts across multiple risk domains. You get an experience of talking to different organizations who have various different practices, and the learning that you get in terms of doing third party risk management, which will which will accelerate your career path in terms of when you go into the cyber. But yeah, that's where I entered into the third party risk management, and things have evolved, things have changed a lot since the time I started doing TPRM. There is a lot of more focus around TPRM with the regulators being um, demanding people, organizations to perform due diligence or make sure that the risks are managed appropriately from a TPRM perspective. And we're seeing a lot of innovations happening in that area as well.
Absolutely, because the third-party risk attack is very topical, and we see a lot of high-profile attacks. I think the most uh, recognized incident a couple of years ago with the SolarWinds impact,
Yep.
which is
Yep.
huge. And that really is a wake-up call for a lot of organizations that if a well-respected vendor that are widely used, deployed across both government and defense, and of course, large enterprise can be compromised the way that it was, what give now? How can they have confidence in using that? But there might be a romantic notion, but it's easier said than done because how do you actually have a conversation with third party because they're not really a defined community is a bunch of suppliers who really have a completely different vested interest
Mm.
to your mission. And we look at recent CrowdStrike incident that we see, those are real life impact that poor passengers, parents who are going on holiday with kids and got stuck at the airport. Not the fault, not the
Yeah.
fault of airline, not the fault of the airport service operators. It's like they just sit there and keep
Yeah.
screaming.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's not a joke. And who you can scream to people and they are still screaming each other as a
Yes.
consequence 3
Yes.
hours later. Now I want to draw attention to another area specialization, and
Yep.
I kind of purposely not mention that because it's a term that many people,
Yep.
there's a term familiar called, you have a recognized specialization, this one called SABSA, SABSA. So
Yep.
I learned a little bit about that. I know it's a very business focused
Yep.
secure architecture conversation. So I can start with just say, asking you, so what I understood from the acronym SASA stand for is Sherwood Applied Business Security Architect. Sounds like some UK things. Sherwood Forest,
Yes.
Robin Hood. Maybe Robin Hood was part of the founder of SAPSA. Jokes
Yes.
aside, please educate our audience. What is SAPSA? Why do you spend your time on SAPSA, and how does it help? And I'm speculating that it probably do help your conversation in
Yeah.
managing third-party risk management.
That's a great question. Now, people often confuse SAPSA with some security architecture certification or a training module, but it's actually a business solution, right? It's kind of help you think when you design your architectures or your cybersecurity strategy from a business point of view. And it starts about like what your business does. What do you care about in your business? What could go wrong in your business, right? What are your important services in the business? That's how it starts from an architectural point of view. Once you know all of these things, then you start getting into the details around, okay, how will you identify risk? How do you design solutions to mitigate those risks that you have identified? And then it gets into the layered approach, which is the most important aspect of SAPSA in terms of, okay, can I look into from a contextual layer about what does the business need? Okay, can I then go into the conceptual layer about how do I make the big picture out of what business needs and how do I achieve those needs? Okay, so that's how, why those things are important. Then we get into the logical layer that SAPSA says in terms of, okay, what type of specific controls are required to achieve those needs? Okay. And then there are those physical layers that you want to call it. I mean, it's not physical layer from a physical security point of view. It's more
Of
about
course.
physical layers in terms of actual technology or processes that you're deploying to
Mm,
achieve those logical layer or logical conclusions that you have.
mm,
And then finally, it's important like every component should interact with each other, should bring some sort of a value add to what you have designed. So let's call it as a component layer wherein we make sure that every piece works well and fits together in the organization.
mm,
And
mm.
once all of that is done, then we look into from a finalized operational layer in terms of making sure that everything that you have designed is working effectively, is trying to make your organization more secure. But remember, it all started with the contextual layer about what business is, what business requirements are, and how do we solve for it.
Yeah, they make a lot of sense, and I think because third-party risk management is all about conversation
Yeah,
suppliers. By
yeah,
definition,
yeah,
you're not allowed and in fact you will probably constrained from doing anything. with
Yeah,
what your supply is supplying, because that is really the whole premise.
yeah,
Or third party supply is they give you supply and you start playing with that.
yeah,
Particularly, you are actually very much an expert in that.
yeah,
Potentially, potentially create a confusion is you are you interfering what they do? You're so good at it. Why don't you just do it yourself, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so can you think of what is the in this Australian context?
Mhm.
SABSA might be right quite useful right now. What sort of where the business challenges that SABSA can help to solve?
From a third party perspective.
Yeah, yeah, perhaps, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, again, if I go back to that contextual layer that we all starts with from a third party, it all depends on what is the service that you are outsourcing to the third party.
Okay.
What is the value that the third party is bringing into your organization by supporting you in a process that you have outsourced, right? And while they are doing that, while the third party is supporting in you in the process, you need to understand what risk that you are passing on, right?
Mm, mm,
Because they might have access to a sensitive data, and if that sensitive data gets impacted, there is a risk. Or they are so ingrained into your operational processes with respect to what just happened in July 19th in
mm,
2024, uh, that if something goes wrong in that third party, your business might fail. So you need to
yeah.
understand that risk and contextualize around it. There is also a lot of regulations that have come in this regard. There is a Digital Operational Resiliency Act called DORA in
Mm,
Europe. In
mm,
UK, there is APRA CPS 230 in Australia, and there are many other regulatory requirements which are forcing organization to define that operational resiliency and not only restrict it to your own enterprise, but also to your extended enterprise, which is the third party layer, right? So that's where contextualization is really important. Then, when it comes to understanding from a conceptual point of view, we need to understand, okay, what's the big picture around where does the third party operations come in, which processes they are supporting, which systems they are having access to. So you need to understand the big picture, draw that architectural view around where they are all touching in your organization. Once that is done, then we need to understand from a logical point of view where they are all touching, what type of security that I need or what type of resiliency that I need to ensure that if something goes wrong, because we all know something will definitely go wrong, right? I
yeah.
mean, in the world that we are living in, things are happening so quickly, the vulnerabilities are coming every now and then that you cannot assume that things will never go wrong, right?
Mm,
So you have to prepare for operational resiliency. You have to prepare to recover back from a resiliency perspective. And then from a logical control layer, you start doing due diligence. You start checking from a physical layer whether the controls that the third party has deployed are good enough to safeguard you from any incident or good enough to recover in case some incident happens. So that's where SAPSA comes in really handy. And then again, from a overall component and operational layer of SAPSA that we kind of talk about is ultimately the goal is that third party is now an extended arm of the organization. You
mm,
have to work alongside with them. You have to ensure that their controls are built in a manner that they are linked to your processes, your solutions. And if their controls are not working, then you are also at the risk while third party is definitely at the risk. So that how does everything works together? That kind of comes in. Uh, Again, a lot of these things looks very, very theoretical, to be honest, in terms of how I'm picturizing, but there is a lot of activities, a lot of work that has happened. And in today's world, there is a Gartner statistics which says like an average organization has over 500 vendors today. To apply that same lens across 500 vendors is way too much, right? You cannot do that. And hence, the angle that you can use, whether you want to call it from SAPSA or even from a FAIR model, as Danny, you are part of FAIR, right?
mm,
Is that you need to identify which third party is bringing the most risk to your organization. You might probably need to quantify that risk to understand, okay, this risk is higher than the third party, which is probably supplying flowers to my organization every day,
mm,
right? And
mm,
then from that contextualization, we need to break those 500 third parties into some triaging layer and say, these are my critical, these are my high, these are my medium, and apply specific sets of due diligence across it, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
so that's how we kind of look at it. I mean, I can go on and on this third party side, given you highlighted my experience on this. But the one thing that I want to just highlight is that things have evolved in the third party world.
Mm,
The days of doing Excel based due diligence are over. You
mm,
probably have to think beyond just that Excel based due
mm.
diligence. You need to think about how do I collect information about the third party, whether it is from passive intelligence sources or not. Third parties are also burdened with so many requests because they are providing services to not only one customer but say 100 odd customers. So there has to be a better way to resolve both sides of the marketplace in terms of a customer wants to get a risk assessment done on the
Yes.
third party, and third party is kind of have to comply to all the customer requirements again and again and again. And
Yeah.
that's where models like exchange has come in, right? Wherein third party completes a
All right.
comprehensive assessment
Yeah.
once, shares it multiple times, customer gets the value of getting that assessment in a much, much faster manner. Within that exchange, there has been more innovation happening wherein we use the information that is available in the public sources in terms of outside in scanning, dark web intelligence, which solutions third parties are using, which is what is the demographic of that third party, what's the security team experience of that third party. We have lots and lots of data available in today's world. How can we bring all of that data and can produce a real-time report on a third party so that you can evaluate third party from a continuous monitoring perspective rather than just from one-time due diligence activity. So there's a lot happening in that area. We can probably a topic for another time, but
Yeah.
yeah, we can.
Yeah. And
Mm.
it's just that you mentioned about the exchange for third-party suppliers evaluation, and this
Yeah,
is where, in fact, we were initially
yeah,
connected because I was using that capability to assist clients with their third supply management.
yeah.
And so, but as you mentioned, that all this sounds grand and very high level. And so I want to drill down to more specific example.
Hmm.
And you mentioned a couple of global framework like DORA, Digital Resilience Act,
Yeah.
mostly in EU. And also you mentioned APRA CPS230. And in preparation of this research, I kind of read up your profile and you
Yeah.
have focused on this conversation.
Yeah.
And I would not assume all my audience would be familiar with CPS 234, might not be relevant to the
Hmm.
organizations. Perhaps we can use that
Hmm.
example is how you using SABSA and your experience, your personal
Hmm.
experience in managing risk to create a context. And maybe start off with explaining a little bit what CPS 230, why does it matter,
Hmm.
and what's the urgency in do that, and then from there is how you maybe some anonymized example you how your
Hmm.
clients
Hmm.
tackled that challenge, the communication challenge.
Yeah, I think just to explain that, if you don't mind, I can bring up a visual, Danny, to kind of explain that.
Sure, of
Yeah, that
course,
just
yeah,
kind of makes it more lively for the audience as well.
yeah,
I'll just
okay,
make this zoom here. So why do we need operational resiliency? That's basically whether it is Digital Operational Resiliency Act or whether it is APRA CPS 230,
yeah,
they're all focusing around the same aspect of it,
of
right?
course.
If you look into this image here you're looking at a line of business, which is a consumer banking organization,
Mhm.
which can have multiple processes working around it. A process can be an account management, a loan processing, and a customer management processes.
Yeah.
Now, these business processes are dependent on certain systems and assets to work. And these systems can be a core banking solution,
Mm,
a CRM system, or loan origination systems, and all that. And
mm,
then these systems are either managed by vendors, like for example, core banking solution, or are owned by vendors, like for example, a CRM system of by Salesforce, for example, or something,
mm,
right?
mm,
So there is an important element that both DORA and APRA CPS 230 is calling out is that you need to have this dependency map available.
mm,
Because
mm,
if you don't know which vendor is supporting which system is supporting which process, and
mm,
ultimately which line of business, then you will never be able to achieve operational resiliency, right?
mm,
Today environment, and if you again go back to the events what happened in July 19th of
mm,
2024,
mm,
is that because there was one critical system, it it people never realize that that critical system is so ingrained into your organization that even the flights could not operate because of the a small a small error that came in terms of that system. So having this visibility is really important.
mm,
And just on this, right? I mean, say suppose that vulnerability is coming into one of those critical systems that I'm talking about,
mm,
then what happens, right? There is a big operational impact in terms of a bank cannot perform its core operations because retail banking cannot support customer queries because that system is not available, or
mm.
loan cannot check credit ratings of the customers, or customer
Yes.
service cannot access customer data.
Mm,
That's a big impact in a day-to-day operations overall,
mm,
right? And people may not realize that, I mean, it's not just a security impact, there is a revenue impact, right? There is
mm,
1,000 plus transaction that happens every 10 minutes in a big four organization
mm,
today. There is a possible a loss of $3 million
mm.
that happens from a value point of view. And
Yes.
I'm just talking this about a critical vendor, Denny, right? I mean,
That's right.
this if the same situation, if I change that vendor to a critical vendor or high risk vendor to a small vendor called Hoot Media Solution, which is just providing customer care support, there is still a problem, right? I mean,
Mm,
this vendor, Hoot Media Solution, may be providing just some marketing guidance and support, but if those marketing materials and campaigns are not accessible, then there is lack of customer engagement.
mm,
You may not be able to do communication with your customers. You may not be able to do promotional campaigns around it.
mm,
That's where I think CPS 230 or operational resiliency is coming into the picture. And what they're really calling out is you having a capability to build a mechanism wherein you have visibility across the different, you have visibility across the value chain, right?
mm,
This is the architecture. Again, think of it from a SAPSA lens, if you want to call it.
mm,
Uh, you're trying to identify which line of business service uh, has which associated business processes, which are the supporting systems, whether these systems are managed by the vendor, whether these systems are managed internally, whether these systems are co-managed by you internally
mm,
as well as your vendors, or
mm,
whether these systems are completely managed by the vendor.
mm,
And then apply the logical controls, then bring those logical controls from a physical controls perspective, and then kind of have an operational layer over it. So conceptualization, contextualization of SAPSA is all visible here in this one slide where we kind
mm.
of depicting the architectural view of what CPS 230 is calling about.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful, and I really learned a lot just from that few minutes you spent on SEPSA to map into this particular use case, CP230, is very helpful. And of course, this is a very imminent business requirement.
Yep.
Regulated exposure 230 must be able to materialize and manage that risk. So perhaps this is a recent security podcast, and
Yeah.
reasonableness is the way I define it. I want to get your view. Is really in the conversation you just had is when the rubber hit the road is so
Hmm.
you have a view on risk. We have an operational model, a business model. When we're a supplier, we have a view, we're a
Hmm.
cost structure. So what do
Yeah.
you want me to do? So reasonableness is where you would help your clients and suppliers to have that conversation on where is a good balance in terms the cost benefit and technology can crowd it those some conversations because you have very different outlook in your mission. So how does
Yeah.
that help to support those reasonableness conversation? It's not right or wrong,
Yeah.
is about valued judgment and investments.
Yeah, so to be fair, whether I mean again going back to whether you're using SAPSA or using FAIR, these frameworks are helping you to make a business decision. These frameworks are designed for you to prioritize things so that you are aligned to the areas which bring most risk to your organization. Whether you're doing quantification using the FAIR model or you're using security architectural design using the SABSA model, these are specific frameworks that I would recommend everyone to kind of look into because they really help in kind of having the right conversation, right? Typically, when we do a business level conversation or a return of investment level conversation, even in the TPRM world, right, doing an assessment requires effort, requires resources, right? If you are using a tool, it also requires some commercial aspects of doing that. Whether you are making the right investment in terms of bringing a resource or bringing a tool, that depends on the risk that you are working on. If a loss of one vendor can impact you $3 million, then you deploying a tool which is costing you $50,000 makes a business sense, right?
Yeah.
And that's where FAIR can really help you in terms of understanding, okay, how do I quantify what risk you are sitting on? And based on that quantification of the risk, you can understand, okay, what type of controls that I need to apply, where should I invest so that that risk does not come in. Yes, security is a cost center because we just try and implement technologies to safeguard us, but think of it in a way wherein if you don't have locks in your door, then a thief can come in. If you don't have brakes in your car, then you might get an accident, right? Think of security as those elements because these are essential stop points for you to check and review whether you have the right balance in terms of what you're offering to the customer and you're offering to the customer in a much more secure manner so that
Mm.
they are trustworthy. I mean, they trust you in sharing that information to you. They trust you in putting money in your bank because you're telling them that I do have the right controls. Not only I will give you interest in putting money, but I will also save your money and I'll help you grow in the future as well. So that's business context or from a revenue context is really, really important.
Very good. Yeah. So we're coming up to the closing to the end of our conversation. I think I'll give me and my audience time to learn your insight, which I learned a lot. So I'll close out and ask you if you can't share your maybe a couple of suggestions. What reasonableness measurement you kind of mentioned a couple of times now. The balance in the
Mhm.
cost and benefit, how is SAPSA going to help perhaps the user, the tool, construct those some reasonableness measurement? Because often they said is you can only mention or you can measure. So
Yes.
how SAPSA maybe helped you and in your experience, some and our example, what those measurement looks like. So our audience can take that away and go to
Mhm.
back to organization and the challenge is say, maybe I would propose a measurement rather than just saying just debate with suppliers, and I can't really point a finger as this is what I want you to do.
Sure, sure. I mean, that's a good question. So typically in a risk management world, we have a term called as inherent risk,
Yep.
right? And that inherent risk is basically used to do that measurement, right?
Mm,
That inherent risk is trying to tell us that, okay, what's the commercial value that you have outsourced to your third party? That's
mm,
starting point.
mm,
That inherent risk is telling me what type of data they have access to uh, your organization, and
mm,
then whether that data has any risk quantification value as well, right? I mean, if you're
mm,
talking about a PII data, then it has a very significant value. If you're talking about a PHI data, it has much more significant value. And if you're talking about personal financial information, that might also have a different value. Understanding how those data sets are being shared is an important element as well. And
mm,
then finally, it's important to understand like how is that data being shared, whether it is shared through an application, then what is the exposure of that application? If it is shared through a network device or any other cloud applications or something like that, then what is the exposure of that, right? How big or
mm,
small those points are, and and then who all have access to it, right? Do you have the right mechanisms to ensure that it's not available to everyone in the world, but it is controlled access? So these are some of the high level pointers. People get into a lot of granularity these days. Like, I mean, I have seen inherent risk questionnaires to expand to say, okay, are you using AI in your technology? Because
That's
AI
right.
can do wonders as well, right? So things have
Absolutely.
evolved a lot in terms of how you quantify or how do you evaluate what's the risk that you are sitting on. And once you know what's the risk you're sitting on and have applied that risk lens across all your third parties or even within your business organization, then you understand, okay, the ones which are critical or high, I probably need to prioritize them first, then the ones which bring low risk to me, right?
That's right.
Uh,
That's right.
someone's supplying flowers to you every day, even if they don't supply a flower one day, it
Mm.
may not have a business impact versus someone responsible for your payment gateway. And if that payment gateway stops, then your transaction stops, your consumers are frustrated, there is a big reputational impact. So you have to just identify third parties based on that lens, prioritize them, triage them as we call it, and then apply the right due diligence strategy associated with it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good summary. And so my takeaway, and you can confirm, correct me if I'm wrong, SABSA helps you to create and build the business context
Yeah,
and really go well together with FAIR, where once the context you identify, you gave us a number of very good examples.
yeah,
Now you can apply FAIR to do the measurements. Then you can use the combination of the context from SABSA and the measurement, as risk measurement,
mhm,
from FAIR to really instrument the actual granular risk management decision and investment roadmap and landscape. So
yeah.
hopefully I got it right. And
Yes, absolutely right,
thank
Danny.
you very much. Well, I'm really glad that we had this conversation. I learned a lot from this conversation. I'm sure my audience do. So I would include some of the links to some of your writings
Sure,
on SAPSA and the other research you're doing. And, I would get a copy of the slide just share because it's really insightful.
sure.
So I'll make that available for the audience. And I look forward to catching up with you soon and also chatting with you on the podcast.
Great for that. Thank you, Denny, once again for having me on the podcast. Really interesting conversation, and would love to have more such in the future. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you. Bye for
Thank you.
now.